that you want to be integrated with yourself, and the way to be integrated with yourself is be sure that you meet every situation of life with an abounding love. Never hate. Because it ends up in tragic, neurotic responses. Psychologists and psychiatrists are telling us today that the more we hate, the more we develop guilt feelings, and we begin to subconsciously repress or consciously suppress certain emotions, and they all stack up in our subconscious selves and make for tragic neurotic responses. And may this not be the neuroses of many individuals as they confront life, that is an element of hate there. Modern psychology is calling us now to love. Long before modern psychology came into being, the world's greatest psychologist who walked around the hills of Galilee told us to love. He looked at men and said, love your enemies, don't hate anybody. Not enough just to hate your friends, because to love your friends, but because when you start hating anybody, it destroys the very center of your creative response to life and the universe. So love everybody. Hate at any point is a cancer that gnaws away the very vital center of your life and your existence. It is like corroding acid that eats away the best, the objective center of your life. So Jesus says love, because hate destroys the hater as well as the hated. Now that is the final reason I think that Jesus says love your enemies. It is this, that love has within it a redemptive power. And that is a power there that eventually transforms individuals. That's why Jesus says love your enemies. Because if you hate your enemies, you have no way to redeem and to transform your enemies. But if you love your enemies, you will discover that at the very root of love is the power of redemption. You just keep loving people and keep loving them, even though they're mistreating you. Here's a person who is a neighbor, and this person is doing something wrong to you, and all of that. Just keep being friendly to that person. Keep loving them. Don't do anything to embarrass them. Just keep loving them, and they can't stand it too long. Oh, they react in many ways in the beginning. They react with bitterness because they are mad because you love them like that. They react with guilt feelings, and sometimes they'll hate you a little more at that transition period. But just keep loving. And by the power of your love, they will break down under the load. That's love, you see. It is redemptive. This is why Jesus says love. There's something about love that builds up. And it's creative. There is something about hate that tears down and is destructive. Love your enemies. I think one of the best examples of this, we all remember the great president of this United States, Abraham Lincoln. These United States, rather. You remember when Abraham Lincoln was running for president of the United States, there was a man who ran all around the country talking about Lincoln. He said a lot of bad things about Lincoln, a lot of unkind things. And sometimes he would get to the point that he would even talk about his looks, saying, you don't want a tall, lanky, ignorant man like this as the President of the United States. He went on and on and on and went around with that type of attitude and wrote about it. Finally, one day, Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States. And if you read the great biography of Lincoln, if you read the great works about him, you will discover that as every president comes to the point, he came to the point of having to choose a cabinet. And then came the time for him to choose a Secretary of War. He looked across the nation and decided to choose a man by the name of Mr. Stanton. And when Abraham Lincoln stood around his advisors and mentioned this fact, they said to him, Mr. Lincoln, are you a fool? You know what Mr. Stanton has been saying about you? Do you know what he has tried to do to you? Do you know that he has tried to defeat you on every hand? Do you know that, Mr. Lincoln? Did you read all of those derogatory statements that he made about you? Abraham Lincoln stood before the advisors around him and said, "Oh yes, I know about it. I read about it. I've heard it myself. After looking over the country, I find that he is the best man for the job." Mr. Stanton did become Secretary of War, and a few months later, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. If you go to Washington, you will discover that one of the greatest statements ever made about Abraham Lincoln is made about this man Stanton. As Abraham Lincoln came to the end of his life, Stanton stood up and said, "Now he belongs to the ages." He made a beautiful statement concerning the character and the stature of this man. If Abraham Lincoln had hated Stanton, if Abraham Lincoln had answered everything Stanton said, Abraham Lincoln would have not transformed and redeemed Stanton. Stanton would have gone to his grave hating Lincoln, and Lincoln would have gone to his grave hating Stanton. But through the power of love, Abraham Lincoln was able to redeem Stanton. That's it. That is a power in love that our world has not discovered yet. Jesus discovered it centuries ago. Mahatma Gandhi of India discovered it a few years ago, but most men and most women never discover it. They believe in hitting for hitting. They believe in an iron for an iron, a tooth for a tooth. They believe in hating for hating. But Jesus comes to us and says, this isn't the way. So this morning, as I think of the fact that our world is in transition now, our whole world is facing a revolution. Our nation is facing a revolution. Our nation. One of the things that concerns me most is that in the midst of the revolution of the world, in the midst of the revolution of this nation, that we will discover the meaning of Jesus' words. History, unfortunately, leaves some people oppressed, some people oppressors. And there are three ways that individuals who are oppressed can deal with their oppression. One of them is to rise up against their oppressors with physical violence and corroding hatred. Oh, this isn't the way. For the danger and the weakness of this method is its futility. Violence creates many more social problems than it solves. I've said in so many instances that as a Negro in particular and colored peoples all over the world struggle for freedom, if they succumb to the temptation of using violence in that struggle, unborn generations will be the recipients of a long and desolate night of bitterness. And our chief legacy to the future will be an endless reign of meaningless chaos. Violence isn't the way. Another way is to acquiesce and to give in, to resign yourself to the oppression. Some people do that. They discover the difficulties of the wilderness moving into the promised land, and they would rather go back to the flesh pots of Egypt because it's difficult to get into the promised land, and so they resign themselves to the fate of oppression. They somehow acquiesce to this thing. That too isn't the way, because non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as is cooperation with good. That is another way. That is through organized mass nonviolent resistance based on the principle of love. Seems to me that this is the only way as our eyes look to the future. We look out across the years and across the generations. Let us develop and move right here. We must discover the power of love, the power, the redemptive power of love. And when we discover that, we will be able to make of this old world a new world. We will be able to make men better. Love is the only way.